believe was the quote. This idea that matter acts, but there are no actors acting upon the action. The verbs are verbing all by themselves without a need to introduce nouns. Everything is signal. Everything is information. Perhaps there lies the mystery of consciousness, you know? But I just think it's a...
I played this chord that was so wrong. I thought I had just destroyed everything and reduced that great night to rubble. Miles took a breath and he played some notes and he made...
Pull it out and pick off the termites that were clinging on with their mandibles. And that was unbelievably exciting back then. He was using and making tools. And at that time, it was thought that humans and only humans used and made tools. We were defined.
Producers, and then suddenly there were studio heads that were women. But interestingly, that didn't change the landscape of women directors, at least in America. The indie world, they started creeping in. Television, they started creeping in. But for some reason, women really had a hard time cracking mainstream movies. I mean, mainstream distributed films.
The political and media system, that there are things you can't really do?
Well, American leadership, in part, comes out of our can-do spirit. We're the largest, most powerful country on earth. As I said previously in speeches, when problems happen,
funds until you can verify that all the conditions have been met. You got the phone. I think this is one of the most exciting ways that blockchains lower our uncertainties, because it means to some degree we can collapse institutions and their enforcement. It means a lot of human.
And there you see the tail of that great beast wrapping around me, and the giant that lay in this grave, the new species of dinosaur, we would eventually call Dreadnoughtus shrani. Dreadnoughtus was 85 feet from snout to tail. It stood 2.5 stories at the shoulder, and all fleshed out in...
He was able to help that director reconceive the character in a subtle but important way that really improved the story. So what we know is, at the heart of innovation is a paradox. You have to unleash the talents and passions of many people, and you have to harness them into a work that is actually useful.
And that we are always adding in a little more flour and a little more water and folding it in and turning it over and never getting around to baking it. If my obsession was eternal life, Navid's obsession was touch.
In order to live the lives that we say we want to live. In 1915, on the eve of one of the great suffrage demonstrations down Fifth Avenue in New York City, a writer in New York wrote an article in a magazine. And the title of the article was Feminism for Men.
That insight is what moved me to write my book, The True American. This immigrant begging America to be as merciful to a native son as it had been to an adopted one. In the mini-mart, all those years earlier, not just two men, but two Americans.
Out that we're probably in a universe that looks kind of like that. And that amazes me. Thanks a lot.
Thinking way that he started talking about the importance of environmentalism in design in the 1920s. Now, he, despite his efforts, was routinely mocked as a crank by many in the design establishment, and admittedly, some of his experiments failed, like the flying car that never got off the ground.
And that would translate into 1 million babies' lives saved every single year. 1 million babies every single year. And why would we stop there? A much more powerful approach to public health. Imagine what might be.
That, if I challenge people to build the equipment they need out of the garbage I find, it's a great way to foster creativity. And what happened was that artists and scientists from around the world started coming to my lab. And it's not just because we value unconventional ideas, it's because we test and validate them with science.
New York mayors are considering that idea of how you can actually constitute a global parliament of mayors. And I love that idea because a parliament of mayors is a parliament of citizens, and a parliament of citizens is a parliament of us, of you and of me. If ever there were
and you might find that they will challenge your assumptions and make you grow as a person. You might get powerful new insights from these individuals. Or, like my husband who happens to be white, you might learn that black people, men, women, children, we use body lotion every single day. Now,
that myself is a projection and that it has a function. A funny thing happened. I stopped giving it so much authority. I give it its due. I take it to therapy. I've become very familiar with its dysfunctional behavior. But I'm not ashamed of myself. In fact, I respect myself, and it's
imagining that I'll just sort of do some celestial navigation and, carry a Bowie knife in my mouth, and I'll hunt fish and skin them alive and, eat them, and maybe drag a desalinization plant behind me for fresh water.
Years were helped, and for that work, when I was a final year law student, I was chosen as the Young Australian of the Year, and I was catapulted from one piece of the jigsaw to another, and their edges didn't fit. Tarnley anonymous Footscray resident was now Tarnley refugee and social activist, invited to speak in venues.
Decided that this is an assumption which we can test. And that's where she had this really ingenious idea to take head measurements of a group of people who were, in fact, anatomists meeting at a conference in Dublin. And she found that there was a group with big heads and a group with small heads. And the very smallest.
So Outward Bound is an organization that sends students of all walks of life on challenging wilderness experiences. Our courses range anywhere from 8 days all the way up to 82 days in length. And we start students as young as 12, take them as old as you can get your doctor to sign off to go on these programs.
That gave people a level of confidence that we were going to get.
And the firm has done spectacularly since then.
So I think we are the only firm, and I said I look at us more as a services company than a financial services company, but we are the only firm that has done better post-financial crisis than pre. If you're a major bank,
who know, I also have aspects of my set that are totally euphoric, and it's kind of even going in a more kind of euphoric direction as I've expanded to include Matt and Colin in the band. But, just if promoters know that it's like a time in the night when people really just need to be like slapped in the face with a 4/4, then they're probably not going to want to listen.
Here, you argue that elimination of corporate welfare, or at least its reduction, should be at the center of tax reform. Why?
Well, let me put it in a broader context. Our country faces a lot of challenges. We, as you mentioned.
And at that point, you have to come to a decision. You actually have to make a choice. You either continue to swim upstream against the grain of who you are, or you surrender to that voice. It feels, for some initially, like it's just
and do so much stuff, it still thinks that a stick is a snake. So we kind of need to be patient with ourselves, but just make every effort to just stop being so stupid.
I would imagine, as we close now, that the vaccination debate, which we thought was concluded after polio
But to have the opportunity to grow in your person like that, it's priceless.
Translate that research into new therapeutics for our patients. You know, you can compare that to leaving no stone unturned. The fundamental scientists, the ones who make the basic discoveries, are turning over those stones, and the translational.
You're saying that you can trust yourself to handle life's challenges. And you're remembering that you don't have to face them alone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Missed out on. So I want to share with you some things that I found, some specifics that you can do with mentors. The first rule is, I call them the mentor rules. It's the law of 33%. You should divide up your life and spend 33% of your time around people lower than you. You can mentor them, you can help them, and they'll help you back.
That all of those people who had adored Eat, Pray, Love were going to be incredibly disappointed in whatever I wrote next because it wasn't going to be Eat, Pray, Love. And all of those people who had hated Eat, Pray, Love were going to be incredibly disappointed in whatever I wrote next because it would provide evidence that I still lived. So I knew that I had no way to win, and knowing that I had no way.
Wind farms and solar plants that are going to double the renewable energy we can generate in this country. These are the jobs building the future. For example, I want to share with you one new development made possible by the clean energy incentives that we've launched. This month, in the Mojave Desert, a company called Bright Source plans to break ground on a revolution.
Period. We find that 35%, more than 1/3 of Americans, will be poor at least once for 2 months or more. That's lesson 1. Since Vista's founding, we've learned that poverty is widespread. It's a much more common experience than we thought it was then.
Audacity to believe that the thing that you're making is something that the entire world wants and needs. And humility to understand that as a designer, it's not about you or your portfolio. It's about the people that you're designing for and how your work just might help them live better lives. Now, unfortunately,
deserving, a word that defines me, but entitled to what? For the longest time, I didn't see. See, I thought I was entitled to earthly glory, using my gifts and talents to build my life story. I had it all planned out, building a life about me, expecting others to want to come and see of my accomplishments and what I could achieve.
We understand that many of our citizens are frustrated by the pace of globalization and feel they're not experiencing the benefits of international trade. We both believe this is an issue that we as G20 leaders cannot afford to ignore. Instead, we must all work together to spur economic growth, to boost free trade, and build a fairer economy.
It's this idea that when we are at our most creative, we aren't even really creating. We are channeling. We are transcribing. We are conduits for something larger than ourselves to erupt, to express itself through us. We become a medium. We become an instrument being.
That the only true fiction in your life is the narrative you use that holds you back. You want that castle in the air? Get it. Stop dreaming about it, wishing for it, and make it happen.
Plane, the collective buzz, the theater of experience that is created by the curation and the design becomes, again, a space of mind that we can dwell in together. We're talking about designer mindscapes that can be shared communally. Places like Burning Man.
A second story over the picture that we see in front of us all the time. Fear is writing that script. Now, fear is going to be a player in your life, but you get to decide how much. You can spend your whole life imagining ghosts, worrying about the pathway to the future, but all there will ever be is what's happening here.
What we're starting to understand is that at the most primary level, reality, matter, actually seems like it's made up of information, okay? Like John Archibald Wheeler, the quantum physicist, used to say that it comes from bit, okay? Bits as in bits of computer data, like data comes before matter. Weirder, because now we're at the point that through quantum physics, through things like nanotechnology, what we're starting to understand is that at the most primary level, reality, matter, actually seems like it's made up of information, okay? Like John Archibald Wheeler, the quantum physicist, used to say that it comes from bit.
For fear of disrupting this organism that society is. Liberalism, on the other hand, begins with the individual. Not saying that we're born as individuals, you know, out of the head of a god, but rather that the idea we're going to go back to some imaginary past or semi-imaginary past, we're going to apply Sharia law, and once we do, everything in the world will be fine. But the other thing a nostalgic reactionary mind can do is to say that we can't go back. But the present is unacceptable. Therefore, we must.
And at that time, it was thought that humans and only humans used and made tools. We were defined as man the toolmaker. And so I could hardly believe what I'd seen. And I didn't immediately send a telegram to Louis Leakey because I felt I'd better see it again. Maybe I dreamt.
While the conservative stresses the fact that we're embedded. Now, of course, we are both things, but the consequence of this is you get two kinds of political theory. One that begins with society. And then once we analyze society and create a future that is an improved version of the past. And fascism is a perfect example of that thought. That thought that things were better in the past, but we can't undo our modern. So a conservative view of human nature is that human beings come into a world that they have not created. You grow up in a society, you pick up the language of that society, you pick up the morality of that society, and what you are is the work of previous.
Try to do, and that is try to make anything that happens into something of value.
So an example of that would be Salafism, political Islamism. The idea we're going to go back to some imaginary past or semi-imaginary past, we're going to apply Sharia law, and once we do, everything in the world will be fine. But the other thing a nostalgic reactionary mind can do is to say that we can't go back.
Artist, but other than that, it was just me and a bunch of guys. Little by little, things changed. More technicians came into the fold. You know, you might see one technician come in, and then little by little, more technicians came up, and then, you know, maybe writers or producers, and then suddenly there were studio heads that were women. But interestingly, that didn't change the landscape of women directors.
Miles just accepted it as something new that happened. And he did what any jazz musician should always try to do, and that is try to make anything that happens into something of value.
That will have some of the qualities we imagined were in the past. Strength, national unity, a pure race. It's very important that we distinguish liberals and conservatives on the one hand, and revolutionaries and reactionaries on the other hand. What distinguishes revolutionaries and reactionaries
animals, and then we realized that we were descended from apes, you know, and then it just keeps getting weirder and weirder, because now we're at the point that through quantum physics, through things like nanotechnology, what we're starting to understand is that at the most primary level, reality, matter, actually seems like it's made up of information, okay? Like John...
And one of the reasons is that it's not just an economic evolution. It's also an innovation in computer science. Blockchains give us the technological capability of creating a record of human exchange, of exchange.
Environmental disaster of geological proportions that is so broad and so severe, it can rightly be called the sixth extinction. Only unlike the dinosaurs, we can see it coming. And unlike the dinosaurs, we can do something about it. That choice is ours.
You have to harness them into a work that is actually useful. Innovation is a journey. It's a type of collaborative problem solving, usually among people who have different expertise and different points of view. Innovations rarely get created full-blown. As many of you know, they're the result usually of
work and family. We often have two phrases that we use to describe what we do. We pitch in and we help out. And I'm going to propose something a little bit more radical. One word: share. Because here's what the data show. When men share housework and childcare, their children do better in school.
That's how it works. It's this public registry that stores transactions in a network and is replicated so that it's very secure and hard to tamper with. Which brings me to my point of how blockchains lower uncertainty and how they therefore promise to transform our economic systems in radical.
When the director saw that drawing, he thought it was great, it was beautiful, but he said, you know, you got to lose it. It doesn't fit the character. 2 weeks later, the director came back and said, let's put in those few seconds of film. Because that animator was allowed to share what we refer to as his slice of genius, he was able to help that director reconcile. So when we look at why it is that Pixar is actually able to do what it does, we have to ask ourselves, what's going on here? For sure, history, and certainly Hollywood, is full of star-studded teams that have failed. Most of those failures are attributed to too many stars or too many That 10 seconds took one animator almost 6 months to perfect. The other thing about a Pixar movie is that no part of the movie is considered finished until the entire movie wraps. So partway through one production, an animator drew a character with an arched eyebrow that suggested a mischievous side.
Surely we can tap into that kind of talent and tools to stop babies dying in the poor world. If we did, then every parent would have the confidence to name their child the moment that child is born.
I witnessed an interaction that changed my life forever. It was a conversation between two women. One of the women was white and one was black. And the white woman said, this is going to sound very anachronistic now, the white woman said, all women face the same oppression.
He finally faced the hatred that had defined his life. He read Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, and regretted his swastika tattoos. He found God. Then one day, in 2011, 10 years after his crimes, Stroman received news.
So if some of you are worrying now that you don't work at a Pixar or you don't work at a Google, I want to tell you there's still hope. We studied many organizations that were really not organizations you think of as ones where a lot of innovation happens. We studied a general counsel in a pharmaceutical company who had to figure out how to get the outside lawyers
thing. Is that going to be on the test? How do you spell structural? So I hope you all can see this is what objectivity looks like.
disembodied Western rationality. And he decided upon reflection that his method of payment would be an intervention in the cycle of vengeance between the Muslim and Western worlds. And how would he intervene? By forgiving Strowman publicly in the name of Islam and its doctrine of mercy. And then,
because it suggested that their process was a neat series of steps done by discrete groups. Even with all those arrows, he thought it failed to really tell you just how iterative, interrelated, and frankly messy their process was. Throughout the making of a movie at Pixar, the story evolves.
We implant some mammalian cells, which you can see in blue, and what happens is these guys start multiplying and they fill up this entire scaffold. Now, as weird as this is, it's actually really reminiscent of how our own tissues are organized. And we found in our preclinical work that you can implant these scaffolds into the body, and the body will send.
Not lost on me that the chance of any one individual entering the fossil record is vanishingly small. But the Earth is very, very old. And over vast tracts of time, the improbable becomes the probable. That's the magic of the geological record. Thus, multitudinous creatures living and dying on an old planet leave behind immense.
The fabric we had was an old duvet cover that another resident left behind, but she did it, and it's perfect. And she looked at it and she said, proof of concept, creation needs constraint. So with these 12 minutes, I'm going to tell you
that more patients were dying of infections that they caught there in the filthy, fetid wards than they were of battle wounds. So she campaigned for cleaner, lighter area clinics to be designed and built. Back in Britain, she mounted another campaign, this time for civilian hospitals, and insisted that the same his height, he grew the bushy black beard that obscured his face, he slung braces of pistols on either shoulder, he even attached matches to the brim of his hat and set them alight so they sizzled menacingly whenever his ship was poised to attack. And like many pirates of that era, he flew a flag that bore the macabre symbols of
a place that had terrestrial sedimentary rocks of the right age, in a desert, a place that had been barely visited by paleontologists. And we found this. This is a femur, a thigh bone, of a giant plant-eating dinosaur. That bone is 2.2 meters across. That's over 7 feet long.
Ministers and presidents, because my premise is that a mayor and a prime minister are at the opposite ends of a political spectrum. To be a prime minister or president, you have to have an ideology. You have to have a meta-narrative. You have to have a theory of how things work. You have to belong to a party
that sees gender equality as something that is detrimental to men. I was on a TV talk show opposite 4 white men. This is the beginning of the book I wrote, Angry White Men. These are 4 angry white men who believed that they, white men in America, were the victims of reverse.
Now, were it quite that easy, geologists would rejoice. It's not. The Library of Earth is an old one and has no librarian to impose order. Operating over vast swaths of time, myriad geological processes offer every possible insult to the rocks of ages.
That they need to live the lives they say they want to live in order to live the lives that we say we want to live. In 1915, on the eve of one of the great suffrage demonstrations down Fifth Avenue in New York City, a writer in New York wrote an article in a magazine. And the title of the article was, in fact, that this chance called for him to give a second chance to a man we might think deserved no chance at all. 12 years ago, I was a fresh graduate seeking my way in the world. Born in Ohio to Indian immigrants.
But I'm just gonna look ahead and trust that you're there. I've drawn a semicircle in the sand in front of me so I don't walk past it and look like I'm floating in midair. Right now I'm standing in the open air on a beach under a palm tree. Kept going back to that thing that Navid said to me that day in Azadi Square, that without that basic constraint, a universe that granted mass to matter, we would not exist. That's one rule. Another rule is that all mass is subject to entropy. And there is no way.
Raisuddin. Mark, you should know that I am praying for God, the most compassionate and gracious. I forgive you, and I do not hate you. I never hated you. Stroman, you are a remarkable person. Thank you from my heart.
Decision-making in a way that you can actually combine even opposable ideas to reconfigure them in new combinations to really produce a solution that is new and useful. So when you look at innovative organizations, they never go along to get along. They don't compromise. They don't let one group or one individual dominate, even if it's
a place that had been barely visited by paleontologists. And we found this. This is a femur, a thigh bone, of a giant plant-eating dinosaur. That bone is 2.2 meters across. That's over 7 feet long. Now, unfortunately, that bone was isolated. We dug and dug and dug, and there wasn't enough.
Dreams. And it's because of those words that I stand here right now, full of passion, asking you to be brave for the kids who are dreaming those dreams today. You see, I want them to look at a CEO on television
that when you look down the stalks of these asparagus, what you can see are all these tiny little vessels. And when we image them in the lab, you can see how the cellulose forms these structures. This image reminds me of two things: our blood vessels and the structure and organization of our nerves and spinal cord. So here's the question.
And don't console yourself that you are the 99%. If you live near a Whole Foods, if no one in your family serves in the military, if you're paid by the year, not the hour, if
the planet, and some of the islands have villages that you can stay and visit and sleep under the shadow of Jupiter, and then there's this other island where there's just one songwriter who sits and plays mandolin for the ocean, and then there are others where there's no one, and there never has been, and so you go just for the pleasure of
feeding mechanism. Dreadnoughtus could stand in one place and with that neck clear out a huge envelope of vegetation, taking in tens of thousands of calories while expending very few. And these animals evolved a bulldog-like wide-gauge stance, giving them immense stability. Because when you're 65 tons, when you're literally...
And that gender equality is not a zero-sum game, but a win-win. Here's what the data show. Now, when men begin the process of engaging with balancing work and family, we often have two phrases that we use to describe what we do. We pitch in and we help out.
Because she looked at me and said, "I thought you'd say that." Think deeper. And then she took off her belt, this belt that I'm wearing now. And she said, "Our universe is built so that particles..."
Forms of it that we face in almost all of our everyday transactions, where blockchains can play a role. We face uncertainties like not knowing who we're dealing with, not having visibility into a transaction, and not having recourse if things go wrong. So let's take the first example, not knowing who we're dealing with.
But we only get one history, and it's the one that we have, but this particular reality was not inevitable. The tiniest perturbation of that asteroid far from Earth would have caused it to miss our planet by a wide margin. The pivotal calamitous day during which the dinosaurs were wiped out, setting the stage for the modern world as we know it, Didn't have to be. It could have been of water that issues forth from beneath a rock in a boulder in a pasture high in the Bitterroot Mountains. The stream next to it runs a few hundred yards and ends in a small pond. Those two streams, they look identical. But one is an anonymous trickle of water, and the other is the Missouri.
Then he learned that not selling it would slash his pay. So he reasoned, like a budding American pragmatist, well, God wouldn't want me to starve, would he? And before long, in some months, Rasuddin was that Olive Garden's highest grossing alcohol pusher.
That provocative movie about a rat becoming a master chef. Computer-generated movies are really mainstream today, but it took Ed and his colleagues nearly 20 years to create the first full-length CG movie. In the 20 years hence, they've produced 14 movies, and I was recently at Pixar, and I'm here to tell you that number 15 is sure to be.
In that dilemma lies the central problem of democracy. And like many others, I've been thinking about what can one do about this asymmetry between 21st century challenges and archaic and increasingly dysfunctional political institutions like nation states.
For sure, they understood that that was not their role. So I don't think it is accidental that many of you did not recognize Ed. Because Ed, like Vineet, understands that our role as leaders is to set the stage, not perform on it. So if we want to invent...
The man who shot Rasuddin grew up in that stingier America. From a distance, Mark Stroman was always the spark of parties, always making girls feel pretty, always working, no matter what drugs or fights he'd had the night before. But he
in the way that I get a lower base salary but a higher commission, or the other way around, a higher base salary but a lower commission. People come into this field because they love to explore, they're adventurous, they like to try new things, and they're excited about sharing their passion with other people. And I love surrounding myself with projects and areas of the company that you didn't even know existed. And that's something that I really value about my current position. An example of that would be that we have a partnership with Backpacker Magazine, and I was able to help them co-create some online outdoor skills classes. And I got to help write the curriculum and do the filming of. An example of that would be that we have a partnership with Backpacker Magazine, and I was able to help them co-create some online outdoor skills classes. And I got to help write the curriculum and do the filming of these classes. And that was something I never even knew that Outward Bound did on a regular basis. And then
we should never lose focus of that objective to grow.
So what was the low point in this? When your volumes went to?
Oh yeah,
everything
volumes went negative. Credit losses went up. So you talk about the affluent segment. Well, there were a lot of people in Florida and California.
But I feel like that takes a degree of optimism. I feel like I love a dystopian artwork, and I love post-apocalyptic, of course, I love science fiction, like we all do. And I think that I also draw on those aesthetics sometimes, but I feel like when we're constantly in that kind of negative zone or in that kind of fatalistic zone, it wasn't like, I want you to do this and do that. It was like, we were both coming together. How can we create something new together? And it's the same with I've been with Matt for 8 years now, and he has such an intimate, that's why it's so amazing that we can collaborate so much, because he has such an intimate knowledge of my work that I don't have to go through and explain things or
just fortuitous several months ago, and that went flawlessly. The second was to make sure that we had a way to communicate and identify all the employees who were operating in the
cultural. I think that the landscape has changed from when I started, from when movement came out to today. I feel like people's have shifted their perspective. People are more open to things. I feel like, genres are more smashed together. I feel like pop isn't as dirty of a word as it was.
Out of Battery Park.
That's right. Is that process in place? Fortunately, we had a dry run that was just fortuitous several months ago, and that went flawlessly. The second was to make
and dancing. Not that people weren't smiling at Unsound 3 years ago, but it was definitely more like this kind of thing. And this year it was more kind of like this kind of thing. And it was like, I don't know, I just think that attitudes and shifts change. And so that's definitely, I'm also responding to my environment in that way.
Yeah. And I mean, seeing
incentives that we've created a tax system that has an incentive to move jobs abroad. And I want to do is create a tax system that has incentives to create jobs. And if you tell a corporation, look, if you don't create jobs, you're taking out of our system, you're not putting back, you're going to pay a high tax. But if you're
going to survive, I immediately that day went to the victims' families and met with them, which was a really incredible emotional experience. And what was also very important is I decided.
Let me hear. Well, let me just give you one example that we were talking about before. Right now, we have special tax provisions for capital gains. If we had had less encouragement to so much financial transactions, the high frequency
first class and you have a companion, that companion flies free. What is important is the service ethic that is involved in the product. That basically any
Are you telling me that I get a free first class ticket for a companion?
Yes.
If I just use this card?
Yes. If you use it with certain airlines.
Which?
And you're kind of just negotiating that within the song. And then if you want to start looking at the logos and thinking about Snowden, you can do that as well, or you can just sort of feel what that might be like through that song.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of going back to this idea of pop as a carrier signal. So like if pop is actually functioning and doing.
And you argue that the proposals you make in here for ending these loopholes, for ending tax avoidance, would actually create a more efficient economy than we are getting because of the tax avoidance that sends the money and the jobs abroad. How would ending corporate welfare benefit the corporations? So we have a tax code that encourages companies to send their profits abroad, to send jobs abroad, and to reward owners of their company whose money may not come back to the United States.
It doesn't make any sense, you might say. and the fact it doesn't, one of the reasons I wrote the paper was.
So there's, just some of that just like thematically kind of pushed me in that way, but also, just my own comfort level of like, I never thought of myself, I still don't think of myself as like a vocalist or like a pop singer or anything like that, that's never really how I've perceived myself. So it was always just, it's been this kind of like evolution of like, how can I push myself to a way that was like really muscular and meaty. And that was, I guess that's inspiring in a way of like how kind of like physical and visceral it's kind of become.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Segmentation standpoint that meet the needs of different customer segments. We also collect a merchant fee because our customers spend 5 to 6 times what someone on MasterCard or Visa does. So that goes back to the price for value.
One of the things that you were talking about as we were walking in was that you're actually expanding.
And nostalgia, even though I love that stuff sometimes, but it's like, we're in 2015, so what are these new feelings and what do these new emotions sound like and what do they mean to us today? And of course, that draws from the entire musical history and past that we have. So things from the past will filter in and be there, but how can we discuss what's happening
things, and that leads you to the fourth phase, which is flow. And that's where you live without thinking, where you actually just find yourself moving from a place of a deeper wisdom than your intellectual, rational mind can manufacture. It's something that...
It begs the question, in a state that has exceptional drought, why are we funneling water, literally and figuratively, to livestock, to cows, to chickens, to pigs, to sheep? In California, we don't have a water problem as much as we have an agriculture problem. And so what I've come up against time and time again, I even had a comment.
That would be a strong deviation from the open mind's history. So a dancing dog out on top of your head.
So it's not my place to judge. It's not my place to criticize. All I can do is try and draw attention to the choices that we're making that aren't serving us well. And
the severity of the drought that propelled activists into the mindset that you're describing, albeit maybe a temporary one.
It's funny because like the drought, other issues that we face, there are relatively easy solutions, but they're inconvenient. You know, and I'm not going to sound, I don't want to sound like a crazy.
Diseases were eradicated. That to you, an example of.
For me, it's an example of humans humans being very unhappy with complicated situations. Like GMOs is similar. Like I can't say I'm 100% pro-GMO or 100% anti-GMO because I think it's...
But eventually we're all going to move in that direction, so why not now?
Because there's nothing in the air that they're actually screaming at. They're imagining things. And I think that, again, from an almost like evolutionary semiotic perspective, the way that we respond to media is that. Like we sit in front of a screen, like now, and you have a profound emotional reaction to pixels.
Companies should be able to make that choice as well. And then he said this, I'm just as patriotic as anyone. Sorry, Mr. Diamond, it's not patriotism, it's a travesty, the corporate equivalent of moral treason. And all the rest of us have to pay for it. There's
for a liquidity perspective.
Absolutely.
Liquidity is life in your business.
Is king. As I explained at the end of the day to our organization down through all levels, if you don't have the money to pay the bills, you got a big problem. People understood what stayed liquid.
I know this as DNR OOC, do not run out of cash.
That's right. That's right. So that was absolutely.
And then trust yourself to handle the stress that follows.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
That's really cool.
For us to give 2-3 months to figure that out makes sense. Now, you know, same thing with the labor with respect to trade. There are going to be some folks who are going to be skeptical, and their impulse is going to be, well, let's pile on some more sanctions and let's squeeze them a little bit more. And any deal that you're going to strike, so that there's more opportunity. Those basic goals still hold true. You know, what people, I think, rightly have been concerned about is that the forces of disorder, sectarianism, you know, most tragically in Syria, but lingering elements of that in Iraq as well.
And the cool thing is that all of these physical benefits of oxytocin are enhanced by social contact and social support. So when you reach out to others under stress, either to seek support or to help someone else, you release more of this hormone, your stress response becomes healthier, and you actually recover faster.
Good to know somebody's doing worse than you, right? That's that 30%. Then you have 33% of people that are on your level. These become your friends, your peers. But the last 33% is what most people forget about. Those are people 10, 20 years ahead of you. They'll make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but that's what you want. And then remember,
That green line shows us the pre-transfer poverty rate. That's how much poverty has been created by the economy without counting the effects of anti-poverty policies and programs. Notice that the economy is producing about the same amount of poverty today as it was 50 years ago.
Enough that when they got to the bottom of that elevator, that developer said, meet me at the airport in the morning. Well, I'll go down in my private jet. You can come down with me to Florida. I'll show you how I invested in hotels down there. Sure enough, my friend learned from this mentor and became one of the wealthiest real estate investors in the world. He persevered because, you see, everybody wants the good life.
All I had to do was exactly the same thing that I used to have to do all the time when I was an equally disoriented failure. I had to get my ass back to work. And that's what I did. And that's how in 2010 I was able to publish the dreaded follow-up to Eat, Pray, Love. And you know what happened with that book? It bombed. And I was fine. Actually, I kind of felt bulletproof because I knew that I had broken the spell. And believe me, I'm extremely grateful to be that person because that whole Eat, Pray, Love thing was a huge break for me. But it also left me in a really tricky position moving forward as an author, trying to figure out how in the world I was ever going to write a book again that would ever please anybody. Because I knew well in advance that all of those people who had adored Eat, Pray, place, I found it in lessons that I had learned earlier in life about how creativity can survive its own failure. So just to back up and explain, the only thing I have ever wanted to be for my whole life was a writer. I wrote all through childhood, all through adolescence. By the time I was a teenager, I was sending my very bad stories to The New Yorker, hoping to be discovered. After college, I got a job as a diner.
And you're remembering that you don't have to face them alone. Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, this is kind of amazing what you're telling us. It seems amazing.
The people who also believed that stress is harmful for your health. People who experienced a lot of stress but did not view stress as harmful were no more likely to die. In fact, they had the lowest risk of dying of anyone in the study, including people who had relatively little stress.
She said there was a role model, a mentor that I had when I was a little girl. She was born in 1918 in Berlin, and she said, we had a renter in our house, Edith Knox, who was a famous piano player from California in the 1920s. And she said, Ty, this woman made such an impression on me. She rented a room for a summer, and she said, but sometimes books only have one or two things that are worth reading. In fact, most books only have that. So I flip through the pages one time. I like to go through 3 times. First time I read the table of contents, the back. The second time, go a little faster. The third time, I just focus on one chapter. See yourself like a gold miner, just looking for that one nugget. Then put it back on the shelf.
Next, because it would provide evidence that I still lived. So I knew that I had no way to win, and knowing that I had no way to win made me seriously consider for a while just quitting the game and moving to the country to raise corgis. But if I had done that, if I had given up writing, I would have lost my beloved vocation. So I knew that the task was that
And what I found in my research is that I wasn't the abnormal path. Mentors, your ability to copy, is the biggest predictor of the success that you will have in life. As Picasso said, good artists copy, but great artists steal, right? And I looked around, and it's interesting. On the elevator, that developer said, meet me at the airport in the morning. Well, I'll go down in my private jet. You can come down with me to Florida. I'll show you how I invested in hotels down there. Sure enough, my friend learned from this mentor and became one of the wealthiest real estate investors in the world. He persevered because, you see, everybody wants the good life, but not everybody. I mean, God help me. I don't know what I looked like when I showed up at that guy's house, but got somebody to drive me in, and I showed up, and Kathy, his secretary, opened the door, and I walked back, and this guy, Mike Stainback from the phone book, I walked up to him and I said, Mike, you don't know me. If you show me what you know, because I figure you must know a lot about money if you can afford a full-page ad in the Yellow Pages. If you show me what you know.
Anxiety or signs that we aren't coping very well with the pressure? But what if you viewed them instead as signs that your body was energized, was preparing you to meet this challenge? Now, that is exactly what participants were told in a study conducted at Harvard University. Before they went through the social stress test,
that black line shows us, using the supplemental measure, how much actual poverty remains once we count the effects of anti-poverty programs. Over the War on Poverty period, we've brought poverty down from 26% to 16%. Now, that's not nearly enough.
The products that I've helped design over the course of my career, and their scale is so massive that they've produced unprecedented design challenges. But what is really hard about designing at scale is this. It's hard in part because it requires a combination of two things: audacity and humility.
Well, 2/3 of that group have one or more disability. Lesson 7 is that disability must be foregrounded in our thinking about poverty much more than it has been. But even those who are able to work and do may still be poor nonetheless. 32.
It's something that I also like to call a state of grace. It's just like show up, right place, right time, synchronicities. It just seems like life becomes a hand-in-glove experience, and it's available to all of us. But we have to move through those 4 stages, and it can be
skills that will help you in all your other classes as well. So I would say go for it. Even if you're nervous, something good always comes out of it. I mean, it's nerve-wracking to go up on stage and to talk to people and like give a performance, but at the end of it, like it feels like such a relief, and it feels really good to have like them like, yeah.
That would make a huge impact, and has made a huge impact on the incidence of lung cancer. We have to keep pushing that and making it clear to everybody why smoking is so dangerous. I think a lot of people still don't understand that. Leftover.
Up that I think a lot of teenagers are fresh out of high school. It's a very vulnerable time, and I had always been very, very shy in my lifetime. I couldn't make eye contact with people. I have a very soft-spoken voice because I just never really thought that what I had to say even was important to be heard.
You have the designers, and then you have their keys that help build all the stuff. So you have to understand how to work in a team, and how decisions you make can affect the rest of the members of the team.
Now, when we're talking about Latino, African American, Asian, minority students, you learn the history of
or broadcasts or listen to radio shows where people are talking about an awakening. And this part serves two purposes. One, it tells you you're not crazy. It tells you that you're not making it up, that other people are seeking the same deeper answer.
We have that, like, the planet is very, very sick.
Well, just think about antibacterial resistant diseases. You're not exaggerating.
And so the hope is that we can sort of be confronted with the consequences of our actions in a way that will sort of compel us to change as opposed to be destroyed by the consequences.
The more you discover, the more that inner self awakens and develops and grows, and you start to feel like you're coming back to who you really are. Which leads us to the third phase. The third phase is that the voice or the guidance.
An impact for me, because then it made me realize I'm not the only person doing this, and there are people that I can look back and be inspired by, and be proud that I'm following in this lineage of creativity, that it's not just about me, it's about all those that came before me and all those that are going to come after me. I think that's what theater
most noble attribute of man, and that was Charles Darwin. Moby also said, it's sad when people see music as a product or a means to an end. And I found that compelling, because he says music is perfect in and of itself, beautiful in and of itself. Now I ask certainly for the individual, but
willing to make that step. Like, we're more attached to tradition and habit than we are with a better way of doing things.
Right. Well, it was out of California that Congressman Waxman, in collaboration with Massachusetts Congressman Ed Markey, now Senator Ed Markey, developed a carbon tax platform that
begin to become educated, that there is a self beyond the ego, beyond other people's feelings or approval, and the more you tune into that, it's like the garden, the seeds of your true self start gestating, they start sprouting and begin.
In those bacteria, some thing that they're making that is activating the immune system to kill the tumor. Because your immune system should kill your tumors. Probably all of us have random rogue cancer cells floating around in our bodies, but by and large, in the majority of cases, our immune
it's inside your being. And that leads us to the second stage. And the second stage is what brings a lot of people to me. That stage is what I call the discovery phase. So now we want to look. Now we're looking for answers, and we begin to search. We begin to read books. We begin to listen to
Shooting is something that a lot of people have problems with, and I credit GRCC and the time I spent in this theater to give me the ability to learn how to troubleshoot, to think critically of a situation, and to attack it in the proper order to find the resolution the quickest. Technical theater classes, either way, are going to give you the basis.
It's a chronic disease, but that requires a lot of funding. So just think about it this way. If we were to double the budget of the NIH like President Clinton did, we would raise it to $60 billion. Now, that would result in a $100 contribution from each American.
Because I just never really thought that what I had to say even was important to be heard. And to go through classes and to constantly be putting yourself out there with the safety net of having other students around you that are also putting themselves out there, and then having
understand them. And so just that by itself in theater is so important.
As a student, I would say that GRCC helped me with my showmanship in that I was able to be creative, especially really in theater class when I took improv. That literally was the best class that I've taken.
How that support is dwindling and the impact that's going to have on us.
Let's talk about it now.
Okay, we'll talk about it now. So I've been in this business for 30 years or so, and I have never seen as restricted a budget in the federal government as I have today. And this is
for people would be social skills and that confidence that I've gained from taking classes here.
People think that acting is so competitive. It does not have to be, and my experience is that it isn't. I felt as if everybody wanted to hold me up and put the mirror in front of my face so that
person doing this, and there are people that I can look back and be inspired by, and be proud that I'm following in this lineage of creativity, that it's not just about me, it's about all those that came before me and all those that are going to come after me. I think that's what theater teaches you. It teaches you a little bit about everything.
The eternal, timeless, and limitless self that we all are. And when we lose touch with that, we start looking for ourselves in the reflections of the world around us, people and approval and standards of not crazy. It tells you that you're not making it up, that other people are seeking the same deeper answers, deeper sense of being. So it gives you confidence. And two, it gives you direction. You actually begin to become educated, that there is a self beyond the ego.
Realizing that we had lost the election, and people started crying, and people started getting so emotional, and I was upset, but then I had this sort of quasi-epiphany, and I realized ultimately what right now we're responding to pixels turning on and off and sound coming out of a small speaker. And I had this thought, everything, and that didn't work. And then he found this middle way, which did seem to work, a way of empirically supported, practical and practicable, sustainable life. And I feel like it's up to each individual to do that and not constantly get so distracted by,
at least when I listen to your music, a planet that I want to be on. How does that figure?
These are really great questions, and I'm trying to figure out how to answer them without seeing like a completely self-involved former grad student.
We all are former grad students.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a former grad student too.
Piece of DNA that has become mutated and that is driving cancer growth.
You mentioned risk factors before, but when you were looking at the 4 most frequent cancer patients, you mentioned smoking. What about the role of what we're eating into the mindset that you're describing, albeit maybe a temporary one?
It's funny because they're like the drought, other issues that we face, there are relatively easy solutions, but they're inconvenient. And I'm not going to sound, I don't want to sound like a crazy vegan animal rights activist, but if tomorrow we
and be proud that I'm following in this lineage of creativity, that it's not just about me, it's about all those that came before me and all those that are going to come after me. I think that's what theater teaches you. It teaches you a little bit about everything, politics, religion, society as a whole.
It might be scary because it does take you out of your comfort zone.
There's a really exciting study that was done by a researcher at Washington University named Jeff Gordon, who showed that if you take the microbiota from an obese individual and put it into a mouse, that mouse was with astonishing clarity. We never able to do that. We handle big data. We do sophisticated molecular imaging. All of these advances now allow us to really move forward and get discoveries that our scientists make in their laboratories into new therapeutics for patients. And at the same time, NIH funding has become very
So I want to talk a little bit about that today, because life is short. I think we all realize the sands of time quickly can slip by in your life. And you don't want to be old when you finally get the good life, or too old, right? It's like the Dutch saying, we're too soon old, too late smart.
Made possible by the clean energy incentives that we've launched. This month, in the Mojave Desert, a company called Bright Source plans to break ground on a revolutionary new type of solar power plant. It's going to put about 1,000 people to work, building a state-of-the-art facility. And when it's complete, it will turn sunlight into the energy.
So let's live our lives in a way that shows others there's more to this world and what it provides. Though what earth fulfills is a fulfillment of lies. So I beg that you would take these words to heart. Spread his message to others. If you haven't, please start. We are created for so much more. Don't miss your opportunity. Life. I put my identity in things that only brought strife. I sought out contentment in the things of earth I desired, but when you're created by God, that's not how you're wired. God was starting me fresh, giving me a mind of clarity, where I could finally see my earthly ways of irregularity, realizing it wasn't about me or the life that I live,
and transformation, so that we may become more than what we are, so that we may expand, transcend, transform. And there's a wonderful idea popularized by Kevin Kelly known as finite and infinite games. Now, Finite and Infinite Games is a book by religious scholar James P. Carse, and Kevin Kelly, who co-founded Wired Magazine, has
fate, we don't think of ourselves as that vehicle to success. And this story has a very unique way of uncovering that specific truth. We get from the world what we invest in ourselves, right? The patience, the daily work, commitment, focus, all these things that transform us, unlock even.
And
open up new vistas.
And on the question that you ask about Hinkley Point, I will be doing exactly as you said indeed in your question, Jason, which is, as you know, I'll be looking at all the evidence around this issue. The way I work is that I don't just take an instant decision. I actually look at the evidence, take the advice. On the first point that you raised, Jason, I mean, we've had discussions about the importance of the trading relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. As you know, I've been very clear that following Brexit, we will be looking to establish new trading relationships around the globe. I think the real
To the degree that our tools become extended appendages, that even though they are not within our biological skin tissue, they are nonetheless a part of our cognitive arsenal. They are a part of us the same way a nest is a part of a bird and a spider's web is a part of a spider. It is our extended phenotype, it is who we are, it is our termites colony. You know that July is Creativity Month here on Shots of Awe, which means that every video we post will be about creativity. It'll be about exploring that liminal trance state, that magical borderland between dreams and reality, that space in which we connect the dots. We'll fall down the rabbit hole. Take our wounds and we can turn them into something larger, that we need not have suffered in vain, is a wild idea, because it doesn't mean that we are happy for our suffering. It doesn't mean that we wished for these tragic things to happen to us as artists, but it means that we're able to take that pain, take that aching rhapsody, and output some warming. But we must also realize that we have the unique capacity with these new construction kits for our reality to not just address the grand challenges of humanity, but essentially to fix the world. Not to win or lose, but to keep the game going. So let us say this, right? Let us stop playing the finite game and let us play. Standing on the other side of that line, right? Trying to explain the nuances of a Shakespearean sonnet to an ape are simply unimaginable, right? This is inconceivable. We simply lacked the wetware, right? So language, what is language? Kevin Kelly says it's a tool. You know, there is a constant debate that takes place when looking at the subject of technology between people that argue that technology is part of who we are and those that believe that technology is fundamentally unnatural and that it's a tool that's being used to ultimately destroy the world. I don't
not wasted pursuing the things that aren't even at the core of who you are. Happiness is the pinnacle, right? Can you be anything better than happy? Is there another level out there? Shouldn't that be the target, the end goal? People say it's not that black and white. It's not that simple.
Warn them that they'd be at the back of the queue for a trade deal if they did. Do you accept you got it wrong on Brexit, and do you regret making that threat, or are you really going to punish us for taking a democratic decision? And could I ask, just quickly, I work for the Daily Mail.
The weight of the now is so powerful that we find ourselves outside ourselves. You become what you behold, so to speak. So that our neurotic inner critic, right, the voice in our head that is nagging us, anxious about the future, or saddened by the past, paralyzed. Between people that argue that technology is part of who we are and those that believe that technology is fundamentally unnatural and that it's a tool that's being used to ultimately destroy the world. I don't fall into that camp. I echo Kevin Kelly's ideas that stipulate that actually technology is unnatural and that it's a tool that's being used to ultimately destroy the world. I don't fall into that camp. I echo Kevin Kelly's ideas that stipulate that actually technology is the real skin of our species. Technology is the exterioration of our...
The opportunities that Brexit presents and make a success of it. We've also discussed the threat from Islamist terrorism The UK and the US have been at the forefront of efforts to defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria, and it's vital that we take action to degrade Daesh abroad to help keep the streets of Britain safe. And the coalition is
Holy! What becomes possible with just one drop beyond that flow? What becomes possible with the rest? I mean, it's a wonderful idea. Most of us, Jamie says, are still stuck as like bliss junkies. You know, we get stuck on the state without raising the stage. But now, insights into the neurophysiology of the brain.
There's another short-lived agreement that doesn't end the war, but which allows the Russians to deflect criticism at the G20 here and at the UN General Assembly. And secondly, what do you make of the kerfuffle yesterday at the airport? And for the Prime Minister, you said that Brexit means Brexit, but I wonder if you could be a bit more specific. Could you categorically rule out the UK?
Right? It's this notion that we're going to offload decisions to algorithms that are going to know us better than we know ourselves. So that when we walk upon the world, options will be afforded to us and offered to us only when it intuitively makes sense. We will never be bombarded by too much. Things will just open up like a garden of forking. And I just love this idea that, you know, us as this meaning-making species, this symbolic representational species, all the pleasure that we seem to get from the world comes from the story we tell ourselves about that experience. Like, we become the paintbrush, you know, we become the meaning. We are the answer to the question we're asking. And I think that loop is fascinating. So I actually think that this is going to be kind of awesome. I mean, some people are scared it's going to create idiocracy and we're all going to be numbed into stupors, but I don't think so. I think we're all going to be hand-delivered universes that extend our imagination to spaces and places and virtualities we cannot even imagine. I think the games are going to get
productive. It is true that not for the first time when we come here, there ends up being issues around security and press access. And part of the reason is because we insist on.
And I assure you that the dust will settle. It always does.
System. The moment you adopt that vision as truth, it becomes truth. Mankind decided we will fly, it became truth. Mankind creates technology that folds space and time so that minds can communicate instantaneously across digital screens. Somebody hallucinated this technology into being. We live in a world where our promises, you know, he talks about walking through a corridor that will lead you onto a craft that will take you somewhere where no one knows your name. It becomes a kind of ontological journey. It becomes a journey of self-realization, of soaring above one's limits. You know, the jet airplane literalizes the human goal of transcending our limitations. Multiplied by place, multiplied by time, that reveals a garden of forking paths of possible consciousnesses, of possible entities, and that your consciousness is mediated. Again, if you think about what I'm saying, consciousness is mediated by the spaces that we dwell. In other words, the designs that we create design us in return. Same truth. Mankind creates technology that folds space and time so that minds can communicate instantaneously across digital screens. Somebody hallucinated this technology into being. We live in a world where our thoughts spill over, and if they can harness the will of the people around us, we can right? In other words, the world on the other side of that line after language emerged would have been unimaginable to the creature standing on the other side of that line, right? Trying to explain the nuances of a Shakespearean sonnet to an ape are simply unimaginable, right? This is celebrated enough in our society because these are the people that allow us to design cities, spaces, and dwellings in which we unfold, right? And if anything, architects should work together with psychologists and with designers who understand the impact of shapes, shadows, and forms upon human subjectivity, right? Design matters. Architecture primates, but when we work together, we are primates that can fly. Hey guys, you want to take a look at shots of all behind the scenes, how it all comes to life? Well then check out this episode I shot on Seeker Stories, which explores my daily rituals.
And our first task is making sure that we get first TPP done, but also that we move forward on the TTIP negotiations, in which we've already invested a lot of time and effort. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
So that we may say, ah yes, I remember what I forgot. In the words of Nisargadatta, the other world is this world rightly seen. Right? This map that describes a departure from the ordinary, leaving normal thoughts behind. Treading forth in a new environment, dealing with conflicts, real ones or cognitive ones, slaying the dragon, solving the conundrum and the existential itch, and then making the return with a new lesson learned. Part of who we are, and those that believe that technology is fundamentally unnatural and that it's a tool that's being used to ultimately destroy the world. I don't fall into that camp. I echo Kevin Kelly's ideas that stipulate that actually technology is the real skin of our species.
Began with the basic premise that even as the UK pursues an orderly exit from the EU, together we reaffirm the very special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. It will not simply endure, but it will continue to grow stronger.
That actually technology is the real skin of our species. Technology is the exterioration of our nervous system. Technology is our extended mind. I phone, therefore I am. But think about it.
Post-Brexit vote that the world benefited enormously from the United Kingdom's participation in the EU. But I also said at the time that ultimately this was a decision for the British people, and the British people made that decision.
Of, oh, that was really meaningful, or oh, that was really special. And we crave these moments, and we work hard for these moments, and we strive to author these moments. But a lot of times they are right there for the taking, if only we were aware enough to open our eyes and plug in.
In my own statement with some of the figures that I gave, we have a very strong trading relationship with the United States, and we will be looking to ensure that we can maintain that strongest possible relationship into the future. And on the question that you ask about Hinkley Point, I will be doing exactly as you said indeed in your question. We both believe this is an issue that we as G20 leaders cannot afford to ignore. Instead, we must all work together to spur economic growth, to boost free trade and build a fairer economy that truly works for all.
Thank you. So we're going to take a couple of questions, starting with Andrew Beattie of AFP.
I was wondering, do you not think there's a risk that there's another short-lived agreement that doesn't end the war, but which allows the Russians to deflect criticism at the G20 here and at the UN General Assembly? Mm-hmm. And secondly, what do you make of the kerfuffle yesterday at the airport? And for the Prime Minister, you said that Brexit means Brexit, but I wonder if you could be a bit more specific.
Take you to places that all the money in the world simply cannot. Capture your purpose and follow it into the sunset. One of those unfortunate things that pops up really sets you back. Especially when you're working and really driving towards something. And obviously this isn't specific to me. You know, everyone has to deal with things that they don't want to. No one has smooth sailing all the time. But I was
so that the space telescope has downloaded space and time into our eyeball. Whereas once we were blind, now we could see. He continues, through the sheer aesthetic force of its discoveries, the Hubble has distilled the complex abstractions of astrophysics into singular experience.
a lot of the times that ends up being the difference maker. One of the reasons I love doing this work is because I talk to so many amazing people. I hear so many great stories about these brave individuals battling illnesses, tough times, but still making a point to run, to work out.
Growing of focus, right? We are told that biochemically no different than doing lots and lots of cocaine. We become addicted to the other person, and we use that as a means to dismiss the authenticity of that feeling, as a way of somehow saying it is not worthy of our attention because it's a kind of pathology.
Think about how powerful that statement is in this context. You can look at the negativity, the haters, as a reason to change your approach, throw the towel. Or you can see it as a sign of progress, an anticipated part of your journey. You can use it as a building block or a stepping stone.
But I also said at the time that ultimately this was a decision for the British people, and the British people made that decision. And I never suggested that we would, quote unquote, punish Great Britain. As you will recall, if you were at that press conference, I was asked about
that we are cognitive beings. We are creatures of mind. We have natural inquiry embedded in our bones, right? Curiosity defines us. We are the frontal lobes of the universe. But it's also said that in life, happiness comes not from finding the answers, but in seeking better questions, right?
It's worth the effort. And I think it's premature for us to say that there's a clear path forward, but there's the possibility, at least, for us to make some progress on that front. In addition, I should point out that the UN Special Rep.
We can reclaim that crossing over so that we can see them as that
Believed in himself. As a kid, he always knew that where he was temporary. It did not define him. It was part of a journey to something better. 2, he outworked everyone around him. He was never the most talented or gifted, but he molded the talent he did have into skill, into the mastery of an art. And now he's
We respect the wishes of the people, and we will put that into practice. So there'll be no second referendum, no attempt to turn the clock back, no attempt to try and get out of this. The UK will be leaving the European Union. I think we have a question from Jason Groves from the Daily Mail.
Hi, it's Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Mr. President, you came to London earlier this year.
Do that? Well, it essentially means that the information technologies, the instruments that we're using today to manipulate and transform the world are now allowing us to overlay digital information on top of the physical world. They have apps already that, looking through the camera in the app, you can place virtual elements into real environments.
In tandem. And the last point I would make is that none of this is slowing down our very aggressive efforts against ISIL. As we've seen in recent weeks, not only have we been able to clear out ISIL from additional territory inside of Syria as well as Iraq, but we continue to systematically go after their leadership, including their head of. We think it's important that the press have access to the work that we're doing, that they have the ability to answer questions. And we don't leave our values and ideals behind when we take these trips. It can cause some friction.
All of them, the most important is the realization that perfection is a myth. And not only a myth, but it's deceitful. It's detrimental to success. See, perfection is, by its very definition, flawless. And in theory, that's ideal. That's what we want.
the data sets that we were able to absorb from those information flows. So that's how I feel about the pivotal role of curation nowadays, and we need to figure it out.
Robust economic relationship that can become even stronger in the future. But first things first. And the first task is going to be figuring out what Brexit means with respect to Europe. And our first task is making sure that we get first TPP done, but also that we move forward on the TTIP negotiations, in which we've already invested.
Can influence perception to the degree that who and what we are is determined by where we are and where we dwell. The wallpaper matters, right? What is within is without, what is without is within. We're like the dragon eating its own tail. We're the Ouroboros, okay? We're Eschur's hands. The hand is to resuscitate that sense of humbling incomprehension, so that we may say, ah, yes, I remember what I forgot. In the words of Nisargadatta, the other world is this world rightly seen. I think we're all going to be hand-delivered universes that extend our imagination to spaces and places and virtualities we cannot even imagine. I think the games are going to get better, and I think we're going to offload ourselves into the games. We're going to live inside of our imaginations, and things will be served up to us as needed, when needed, and future that hovers over the present, that provides a map of all the ways the present can reinvent itself. That's what leaders do. They distort reality. But here's the thing, there's nothing fake, there's nothing inauthentic about distorting reality, because the distorted reality becomes real the moment that perception becomes the main operating system. The moment you adopt that vision.
It's vital that humanitarian supplies get to innocent Syrians who are in desperate need. And this afternoon, I will urge President Putin to do all he can to get the aid convoys in and to end the indiscriminate bombing of civilians. And next week, the Foreign Secretary plans to host the moderate Syrian opposition in London as we continue to support.
And you're able to achieve excellence and virtuosity that exceeds normal human levels and thresholds for what's possible. We transcend ourselves in these moments of flow. And Jamie Wheel, who co-founded the Flow Geno project with Stephen Kotler, talks about it in this TED Talk, where he says a lot of us know these flow states, but our self
holds you back. You want that castle in the air? Get it. Stop dreaming about it, wishing for it, and make it happen.
Environment. So it's this notion that you're mapping the real world and overlaying agency, information, gamification, mind into it. So what does that mean? It means that more and more of the world starts to feel re-enchanted. More and more of the world can be turned into gamified experiences. There's more cognitive activity occurring
between the United States and the United Kingdom. That stretches back many decades, and it will continue for many decades to come. Teresa.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here at my first G20 summit, and pleased to have had the opportunity to meet you, Barak. And as you say, the United States is a special part.
Because I think the notion was that the consequences of Brexit would be minimal, and we would just go ahead and start lining up a whole bunch of free trade agreements separate and apart from the EU relationship. And my simple point is that we've put
just an idea being put off for a better time that never came. There will never be a moment in your life more precious than the one you're living in. Your heart beating in your chest, the air in your lungs, the blood in your veins. They're giving you an
perceive their partner the way that other people perceive them, as a complete individual, as a complete self-sustaining person, not the other half of you, but as a solid whole. And so this idea that attraction requires a kind of distance, that even desire requires a crossing over, she says. And I thought that was absolutely a building or a cathedral can compare to that feeling of freedom, of exhilaration that machine promises. You know, he talks about walking through a corridor that will lead you onto a craft that will take you somewhere where no one knows your name. It becomes a kind of ontological journey. It becomes a journey of self-realization, of soaring above one's limit.
An assumption is that if, in fact, the people of the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union, their first priority would be to renegotiate terms of trade with the economic unit that they sell half of their goods to. So that, in fact, is...
It doesn't mean that we wished for these tragic things to happen to us as artists, but it means that we're able to take that pain, take that aching rhapsody, and output something in the world and make a contribution. Because at least that way we validate the fact that we exist. We affirm ourselves. We have no choice but to do so in the face of entropy. Because how can we incorporate that into our own relationships? How can we create space between us and the ones we love so that we can reclaim that crossing over, so that we can see them as that self-sustaining entity and fully appreciate them as the fully rounded, complete being that they are? And I think she's onto something, that Esther Perel, and for that reason I think she's brilliant, and I think
You're establishing an expectation that cannot be satisfied. You aren't allowing yourself to dive in, to gain momentum, to take flight, because you're questioning your judgment. You're holding back. You aren't putting yourself out there. If you're not perfect, if your work isn't perfect,
on Shots of Awe, which means that every video we post will be about creativity. It'll be about exploring that liminal trance state, that magical borderland between dreams and reality, that space in which we connect the dots. We'll fall down the rabbit hole, we'll fall through the looking glass. It will
terms of trade with the economic unit that they sell half of their goods to. So that, in fact, is, I think, the approach that the Prime Minister is wisely taking, that in a prudent,
And his son explained that a piece of paper fell on the floor. And when he bent over to pick it up, he could see through the bottom of the glass table that there was a picture of a man on the back of all the little pieces. So he sat up, turned all the pieces over. People say it's not that black and white. It's not that simple. But it can be that simple. Find out what you're about and let it unfold in front of you. Let it take you to places that all the money in the world simply cannot. Capture your purpose.
which means that even physical pleasures, trivial things for other animals, mating habits, eating, reproduction, so on and so forth, to us become cosmic acts, impregnated with significance. We are travelers in search of signification. And so even sensuality has been turned into poetry. Apes have sex, human beings.
So that, in fact, is, I think, the approach that the Prime Minister is wisely taking, that in a prudent, well-informed fashion, with consultations with businesses and stakeholders, as well as her counterparts.
I don't know. I haven't resolved that yet. From the moment that we started to create architecture, to put objects in the world, to make art, to carve tools, we've been augmenting reality. So for the digital revolution to finally catch up to that is a perfectly natural emergence.
That pain, take that aching rhapsody and output something in the world and make a contribution. Because at least that way we validate the fact that we exist. We affirm ourselves. We have no choice but to do so. In the face of entropy, in the face of death, to not say that we exist is to not live.
I think that one of the things that we enjoy the most as human beings is to lose ourselves in an experience, to find ourselves in a situation in which the gravity of the moment, the weight of the now is so powerful that we find ourselves outside ourselves.
Or bad. You know, that old glass half full, half empty concept. So I began thinking about how I can take this unfortunate situation and rather than suffer because of it, you know, how I can benefit from it, make it an advantage. When you really think about what a set, these things that transform us, unlock even the toughest doors. Because piecing together the world you want is an impossible task if you haven't created your ideal self first, if you haven't built yourself up every day, making yourself a little better, a little stronger.
Company that said that the future of design is anticipatory choice, right? It's this notion that we're going to offload decisions to algorithms that are going to know us better than we know ourselves, so that when we walk upon the world, options will be afforded to us and offered to us only when it intuitively makes sense. We will never be systems with positive self-reinforcing feedback loops that teach flow, to make flow an innate, natural emergence. This is what becomes possible. And then, who knows, right? As Stephen Kotler says in the book, The Rise of Superman, who knows what becomes possible? We become superhumans. What we are, so that we may expand, transcend, transform. And there's a wonderful idea popularized by Kevin Kelly known as Finite and Infinite Games. Now, Finite and Infinite Games is a book by religious scholar James P. Carse, and Kevin Kelly, who co-founded Wired magazine, has praised it for altering my thinking about life, the universe, that extends our thought, our reach, and our vision. We are a tool-making animal that has been in a symbiotic feedback loop with technology since the beginning of stone tools. I mean, think about it. Once we created stone tools, our jaws shrank. Once we discovered that fire could cook our foods, making every meal more efficient, so that we can see them as that self-sustaining entity and fully appreciate them as the fully rounded, complete being that they are. And I think she's onto something, that Esther Perel, and for that reason I think she's brilliant, and I think everybody should watch that TED Talk, because, you know, if we could hack the secret to desire in the long term, that could solve a lot of our problems. This is where boarding a craft that flies you across the world can be therapeutic, like injecting you with a little bit of life by stimulating you and jet lagging you and placing you in an entirely different wallpaper of the mind. It's why travel revitalizes. It's why people self-medicate. Sometimes.
And that for mothers like Sarah Shea, who honored her missing son for more than 40 years, we will never stop working to bring home our prisoners of war and our missing in action. We leave nobody behind. No one.